It's Create Day, my friends, and I cannot tell you how excited I am to finally be back on here with you all. I have really missed this in the last month. So today I have some Christmas and wintertime DIYs to hopefully inspire you for your next project. Welcome to my channel. Let's get started. I have this piece of scrap wood that is pretty beat up. It's warped, and I've already sanded it at this point, but I knew that I could just give this piece of scrap wood some new life. So I'm starting off with my cottage white chalk paint. I'm going to go ahead and paint the entire piece with 2 coats, and then I will be decoupaging this napkin on there that I got from Amazon, which I will leave the link below for you in case you're interested. I'm watering down this chalk paint because it is kind of old and it's really thick, and I needed it to be a little bit smoother to work with. Once that had dried, I took my napkin and separated. There were 2 plies on here. The first one just kind of fell off, and the second one I used a piece of Scotch tape to get it started. And then I could lay this one ply, the very top ply out, figure out where I wanted it, and then start decoupaging this on my board with my Mod Podge. Now, this is a warped piece of wood, and I am using the concave surface for the decoupage. I work in sections, like on this one I did thirds, and I just want to smooth out the one section first before I lift that back up and do the next section. And I also used a little wad of like a plastic baggie to help smooth out the wrinkles, because these napkins are really delicate, so you don't want to press too hard with your fingers. And I found that the like that or saran wrap just helps glide across there and smooth it out. I let this dry a little bit, and then I did my second coat of Mod Podge on top of it to seal it in. And then I took it out and sanded off the edges of the napkin with my orbital sander, and I also distressed the board with it. Originally, I was going to leave it like that and just add some embellishments to it. But to me, this piece just kept saying, I'm an old book. You need to make me into an old book. So that's what I went with. I'm going to use my Dixie Belle's Dusty Blue Mineral Chalk Paint to paint the spine and back of what is now going to be my faux book. And even though going this different direction with this meant a lot more time and thought put into it, I absolutely love it. I love that this piece of wood just makes this look like this has been a well-loved book that's been read many times over, and I really love how this turned out. I think I only had to do the one coat on the spine and the back of the book. Now here I'm just painting on that blue in kind of a little curved section at the top of the book, just to make it look like that's part of the binding. I also go around the edges on the front, just gently, slightly overlapping that decoupaged napkin to give some definition that that is the cover of the book. Now I'm going to work on the spine of the book. This is a little stamp from IOD's Adornment Stamp set. I'm going to be using that and then a stencil, just a portion of this stencil that came in this package that I think I got from Hobby Lobby, but I'm not sure about that. I'll be doing both of these in Stays on Ink in Timber Brown, and for the stencil I am using that little sponge brush. So now I've inked up my stamp, and I'm just going to press that on the top, and then I'm going to ink it up again and do that on the bottom. The stamps went on pretty easily. This piece is pretty damaged and it's not level or completely flat. But with the stencil, it was a little bit more difficult, but I made it work. And so I taped off the areas that I did not want the ink to go through on the stencil, and then I tried to tape it down onto that as well to help hold it into place. This just took a little bit of work because it just wasn't sitting, flush with the surface. So a little extra work, but it ended up turning out just fine. And once I got that top one done, I'm going to just flip that stencil around and do the same thing on the bottom section, so that now I'll have a space in the middle that instead of putting a title of a book, I'm just going to do a snowflake. Once that ink was dry, I just took some fine grit sandpaper and sanded it down a little bit. The ink was way too new and bright looking, so I wanted to age that up like the rest of the book. Now for my snowflake, I'm using my IOD mold called Blitz. I'm putting some cornstarch into the one that I want to use, and then I'll be using my IOD air dry clay to create my casting. Once I have most of the excess pulled off with my fingers, I do like to use a little scraper to get the back nice and flat. And the detail on these molds is just amazing. They are so pretty. I'm going to go ahead and glue that down with some Tite Bond glue. Yay, I finally got some Tite Bond, you guys. I don't have to use Gorilla Wood glue for everything anymore. And it does work really well, so I'm very pleased that I finally picked some up. So I glue that on there, and I do let it dry for a little bit before I paint it. You could paint it right away. I was working on other parts of my project, so it did get pretty dry, but I didn't have any cracking or lifting or anything, so it turned out really well. And now I'm going to go over that with that same dusty blue color that the rest of the book is. I did switch out to a small artist brush to get around the sides of that snowflake, and without, going over my stenciling, and then it helps to fill in all those little tiny details. Next, I'm using the color Sandstone and a palette knife to make my lines on the top, side, and bottom of my wood piece to make it look like book pages. So what I'm doing is taking the edge of that palette knife and dipping it into the paint and then dabbing off the excess, and then I'm just going to drag this across the top of the book. And it takes several tries. It didn't work every time, but eventually I kind of got the hang of it. I knew how much paint I needed on there, and then I was able to just kind of start scraping that along and creating lines that make it look like book pages. It's definitely not exact. It doesn't look like perfectly like book pages, but it gives that illusion, and that's all I was going for. This is a very rustic piece, and I just wanted the illusion of the book pages. So I'm really happy with how this turned out. Now I'm going to go over this with my Jolie Clear Finishing Wax. I'm going to brush this on all over the entire book and then wipe it back with a cloth so that I can go in with some antiquing wax and have more control over it. And I will be leaving links down in the description box of everything that I can get a link to. And I will also leave a list of all the products I used, even if there is no link for them. Now it's time for our antiquing wax. I'm going to go ahead and brush this over all the pages first and then wipe that back. And then I will go ahead and add it to the back and the spine of the book. And when I get to the front, I do it around the edges, and then with the little tiny bit that was left on my brush, I did kind of run it around the very front of the book. I just didn't want to get as much coverage on the front as I had everywhere else. So here's where I'm getting that in the details of that little snowflake and just adding some really nice age to this entire piece. My finishing touch to this is some Rub and Buff, but I grabbed the antique gold instead of the Spanish copper, and as soon as I got that on there, I was like, oh, nope, wrong one. It's too bright. So I grabbed the Spanish copper and just went over that gold that I had put on there to cover that up. And then I went ahead and just using my finger, I think there was one part of the star or the snowflake that I felt like I needed a brush, but for the most part, I just use my finger to rub this around all the edges and onto the details of the snowflake. This last step finishes up our little piece of scrap wood that did not want to be just a shelf sitter. He wanted to be a book. Here's how it turned out. My next project is this bottle that I picked up from the thrift store for $1.49. And this is one of the decoupage papers that I purchased from Milton's daughter. She sells all different types of decoupage paper as well as other products. In case you're interested, you could check her out. I picked out the image I wanted to use and cut it out, and now I'm going to use my water pen to go around the edges so that I can tear it and give it a more natural, organic edge. I did not want just that straight edge on there. What I'm going to be doing is decoupaging this onto the back of the bottle so that you can see it through the front. So it'll be decoupaged on the outside face down versus how you would normally decoupage face up. And you'll see how I manage creature of habit. I decoupaged the wrong side of it, but that it turned out just fine. And I'm going to use Mod Podge for this. I spritzed this just to kind of, this rice paper is more hardy than like tissue paper. So I just felt like it would help it to smooth out better. I'm laying it on there to see the placement that I want. And when I figure out where I want this, I'm going to go ahead and start applying my Mod Podge. But of course, I'm doing it on the back because that's what I've done my whole life, right? And after I get it all on there, I realize that I did it on the wrong side. So then I just flip it over and do it on the front like I was supposed to. And, no biggie because now the back's already decoupaged. I don't have to go over it again once I put this down onto my bottle, face down in the position that I want. And then I can just smooth it out with my brush. I wanted to make a frame for this using IOD's Frames mold and their air dry clay. So I just, again, dust this with cornstarch and press my clay down into this mold. And then we'll continue to, remove the excess and smooth it out, giving it a nice flat back like I always do. And then I'm going to cut out the center portion because that's where we're going to see our little decoupage piece through. I'm using an X-Acto knife for this and dipping it in water to help it glide through that clay a little better. I am just cutting out the center section. It's hard to see from this angle, but just the very middle up against the edge of the frame. It's hard to explain what I'm trying to say. But anyway, see right there. It's the very inner line of that frame that I'm cutting out. And I moved this to this scraper that I have because I realized I shouldn't be cutting through on my mat, my silicone mat. So I got that all cut out. And now I just want to smooth down the inside area with my palette knife and my finger dipped in water, just to make sure we don't have any rough edges. I'm using Tite Bond to glue this onto the front of my bottle. I'm going to lay this on there and then kind of pick it up and eyeball it. I want to make sure that it frames the little deer on my rice paper as best as it can. Once I'm happy with the placement and have it all pressed down, I'm going to go ahead and use a baby wipe to remove any excess glue off of the sides. And so now I'm going to go ahead and give this a coat of my Buttercream Dixie Belle mineral chalk paint. And I'm going over the entire thing with the exception of the bottom of the bottle because that's where I'm going to have a light source. I don't want that painted over. And I paint the frame, but I make sure that I don't paint in that middle section where you can see the deer. I'm going to add some texture to this with some bakery tissue that I got from Amazon. I like using this for decoupaging on, like if you wanted to print out some words and decoupage them on or whatever. It's just like tissue paper, but it just has a little bit more stability to it. So here I'm using a tear ruler just to start the edges to get that straight edge off, and then from there you can just take it and tear it into random size pieces. You can crumple them up if you want or whatever, but I want texture and I want to cover up this unsightliness of that rice paper. So I'm with my decoupage, or with my Mod Podge rather, I am going to be placing this on there not wrinkle free. I'm purposely going to make wrinkles. I will crumple some of them up. Oh, and here I'm just showing you the cups I get. I got these from Amazon. If you make a lot of stuff and you like to pour your paints and Mod Podge and whatnot into a cup, I thought, oh, well, you might be interested in this 200 pack of cups I have. Anyway, so here I am. Okay, I'm putting the Mod Podge on and then laying that tissue paper on there and just going over it, and purposely, like if it doesn't wrinkle up on its own, I'm purposely making it wrinkle up. I just wanted a lot of texture on this to help disguise where you can see that the rice paper is on the back, because it is hardier than a napkin, so it kind of really shows up. But I also like the texture anyway. When it comes to painting, I just think it adds a lot. So you can see there's lots of wrinkles, and that's how I want it. I'm going to continue this process over the entire bottle, and around that frame I just pick pieces that will kind of butt up to the edge of that frame nicely, and that's all we're going to do with that. Once it's dry, I'm taking the Buttercream, Dixie Belle Buttercream paint, and now I'm applying it with a sponge brush. Instead of a regular brush, I just wanted to not have the brush strokes. Next color is that dusty blue that I used on the previous project, and I'm going to sponge that on with a little sea sponge over the entire bottle, but not doing total coverage. I still want some of that buttercream paint to show through. Then I use a small brush to get as close to that frame as I can. Now I'm going to put some white acrylic paint onto my little plate that has the blue paint on there, and I'm going to take that sponge and dip it back and forth between the blue and the white to create like a whole new color, a lighter blue, and sponge that over the entire bottle. This is where just adding these different layers of colors can, it just brings so much more to the project. I don't know, I just like it. I like layering my colors and blending them together. I just think it really adds to it. But it's personal preference if that's not your look. I think this bottle would have been adorable just painted white and nothing else, like with the scenery in the background and everything. So now I've got some more white, and so at this point we're almost straight white. There's the only blue is what's left on my sponge. So I am just doing like a final white on here to kind of really lighten that up. And that's how it looks now. Onto the frame, I'm using Folk Art's dark brown and a small artist brush, trying to get into all the details of that beautiful frame. I'm using Dixie Belle's Grunge Glaze to go around the outer edge of that frame, hopefully to add a little age to it. But it wasn't quite enough for me, so while it was still wet, I went in with Dixie Belle's Dixie Dirt in the color Ash. This just needs something to stick to, so you can use the glaze like I did. You can use a sealer, like a clear liquid sealer like Mod Podge or polyacrylic. And then you just, with a separate brush, you apply this into that glaze. And then I let it sit for a few minutes. And then I took a brush and dusted off the excess. Now it was time to remove the little bit of brown paint that I'd gotten onto that glass. So I'm using my X-Acto knife to just go around and scrape that off. It's time for sealer, and I'm using my Select Seal matte sealer, brushing it over the entire bottle and the frame. Now I'm going to use my antique gold rub and buff to go over all the little highlights on the frame. And I do deal with that black cap on the top, you guys. I don't leave it like that. I remove the cap, and then I'm going to paint that with my dark brown paint. And then I will, when that's dry, I do a couple of coats of the dark brown on the cap, and then when that's done, and when it's dry, I go over it with the same gold rub and buff. And then I put it back onto the bottle and wrapped that in twine. And then I realized that I forgot my fake snow. So I ripped the twine back off so that I could take that cap back off, made a funnel out of a piece of computer paper rolled up, and added just enough fake snow to cover the bottom so that it comes up to where their little feet are. Then I went ahead and put the lid back on and rewrapped my twine using hot glue. And now we are on to making the base for this to stand on. I'm using these two little signs I got. One was from Dollar Tree, one was from Dollar General. I'm going to give them a light sanding so that my paint will adhere. I need to drill a hole in the center of this that will fit a little tea light through it. So that's going to be my light source for the bottle. So I just used a small drill bit and then went up to a bigger one, working my way up till I could get to these spade bits to make a hole big enough. My biggest spade bit was not large enough for the tea light to fit through. Here's where I'm marking on So I marked the center onto the other piece because that's going to be the bottom where the tea light comes through. And my biggest drill bit was not big enough for the tea light. So I ended up having to go in with a utility knife and making that hole bigger. See, it's like it just wasn't big enough. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out by hand until that tea light can fit up through there, because I want the tip of the flame part to be as close to that bottle as I can to get as much light as I can into the bottle. So hopefully this makes sense, that is the bottom section and this piece goes on top, and I want that little flame tip to come up as far up in there as it can with that bottle resting on top of it. So see here, I've got the bottle on top there. That's the look I'm going for. So now it was time to secure that tea light into place. I'm using my hot glue on the top part and then around the bottom to keep it securely in place. And this way you'll be able to change the battery and turn it on and off just by picking this up and turning it over. I'm using Tite Bond to glue the two pieces together. I use a baby wipe to clean off any excess glue. I let this dry and then we can move on to paint, starting with my white gesso as a primer. I'm painting the underside of this as well, so I'm going to go ahead and primer that. I want this to have a nice finished look when it's done. So now I'm going to go in with my Dixie Belle Buttercream chalk paint and paint the entire top and sides of my little riser that I'm making for my bottle. Now I'm using my Folk Art dark brown paint to go over that bottom what is it, ledge, just the bottom portion of the riser. It took, I believe, 3 coats to get complete coverage. And so now I'm going to go ahead and bring that color all the way down on the bottom and on the inside bottom of the riser. I wanted to add some feet to this, so I'm using these little wood slices from Dollar Tree. And again, with my dark brown paint, I'm going to water that down and use it kind of like a stain on these. And just brush that on there and then wipe it back with a baby wipe. I'm using my Dixie Belle Buttercream chalk paint to just dry brush around the bottom portion that has the dark brown paint on it. Get a little paint on my brush, dab off most of it, and drag it around just to give a little bit of an aged effect. Now I'm going to use a vintage texture stamp from IOD, and I'm going to be using my Stays on Ink in Timber Brown. I'm inking up my stamp and then lightly pressing it onto a piece of copy paper so that I don't get a super dark impression. I'm going to then turn it around and use the other side and get just a little bit more ink on there so that it looks more even across. And that's how that looks. And so now I'm going to do the same thing on the sides of the box by just inking up that one little section on the end of the stamp. When the ink was dry, I am ready to seal this piece with the Select Seal Matte Sealer. This is the sealer I used on the bottle. And now I'm going to take my antique gold rub and buff and go around the bottom edges of the riser. Time to add some jute twine. So I'm using my hot glue and starting in the back of the riser, attaching it to that bottom lip. And then I'm going to wrap this around several times. I think I did four or five times around this, just attaching periodically with a little spot of hot glue. And then when I got that done, I got around to the back and then cut it off and glued it down. I didn't like how you could see some of the white through there, so I took another strip of the jute twine and glued it on right onto that little section that was still showing. I used a lighter to burn off all the fuzzies, and then it was time to add the final embellishments and the feet to this riser. I'm using Tite Bond glue on each side. These little wood slices, even though they're small, there's still a good portion of them that hangs off and has no support. So I thought, you know, the wood glue and then a little dot of hot glue in the middle there. But I did have some trouble with them staying. I had one break off, and so I went back in with super glue. It just worked better. I don't know, for whatever reason, the Tite Bond and the hot glue just wasn't enough. So now, again, with the dark brown paint, you can see I have a theme going here. I have these little wood cutouts. I think these were from Hobby Lobby. I'm not sure. It could have been Amazon. Painted him a couple coats of the dark brown, and then I'm adding that antique gold rub and buff. Or I just wanted it around the edges, but it was so tiny I ended up using a brush instead of my finger. And then I have that snowflake. It's a wooden snowflake, and I'm going to go ahead and attach the deer to the snowflake with some hot glue, and then I'm going to attach that to the front of the riser. I cut off a couple of pieces of greenery from some picks that I had, added that to either side of that deer and snowflake, kind of running it underneath the snowflake. I added a little bit of the StazOn Temper Brown ink to the feet to make them a little darker. Turned the light on, and this little project is done. On to our third and final project. I am using this vintage type window frame decor piece that I've had for many years now, and I'm no longer using in my decor. And then I have this sign that is got some damage to it. So I'm going to tear off the backing and use the innards of this, it's like cardboard, but it's thicker like fiberboard. I'm going to use that to go on the back of my vintage window sign that I'm creating here. So the little tabs in here were not the kind that you could just press up and remove this cardboard piece from. I did have to pull them all out with a pair of pliers in order to remove that section for me to use it. This board was almost the perfect size for my little window frame. It did hang over a little bit on the side and on the top. And I do need to remove those hangers that came with this. They will be in the way of me attaching this board on there. So I laid the board out with the window frame on top and marked where I needed to trim this off. I used a utility knife and a lot of elbow grease to get this trimmed down to size. And then I was able to just sand the edges to make it smooth. I'm going in with Dixie Belle's chalk mineral paint in the color Caviar. I'm misting my brush first. I find this helps the paint apply much smoother. My idea here is that even though I don't want this board to be black, I wanted to completely block out all that lettering, and I feel like it's easier to cover the black with the white color of paint versus just going in with the white and trying to cover up the black lettering that's on there. So once that was dry, I'm going with Dixie Belle's Buttercream, and I'm going to do a couple of coats on this to cover up all that black. I want to age this up a little bit, so I chose Archival Ink in the color Pebble Beach. And I thought I could use my little sponge dauber that I use for my inks. Um, it kept leaving that round mark when I would go to apply it. I went ahead and did this over the whole board to add some age, but it just wasn't giving me the look I wanted. So once I had covered the board with a bunch of this, I did take a baby wipe and go over and kind of smudge all that out to kind of smooth out the harsh. You can see how there's the lines, how it leaves like the circle marks. So I just kind of wiped over all of that to just kind of smooth it out before I go on to the next step of aging. And for that, I will be using Dixie Belle's Grunge Glaze. I am just applying this very lightly. In a way, I'm kind of doing a dry brush technique. I don't want to get too much on here. This is not sealed. So I'm just going to lightly brush some of this all over the entire front of this board. And then I will take a baby wipe and wipe back any excess. Next, I'm taking that same Iron Orchid Designs decor stamp called Vintage Textures, and I'm using IOD's ink in the color Stone Grey. I'm inking up my stamp, and I'm going to just place this randomly across the board. I'm using a light touch with this. I do not want dark impressions of the stamp. I just want a hint of texture. Then any areas that I felt were a little too dark, I just took a baby wipe and wiped that back. That's one of the nice things about the IOD ink is you do have some working time to wipe it back if you need to. My last step for the background of this piece is to take some white acrylic paint, water it down, and then I'm going to use a little fan brush to add some little splatters all over the board. Once that was dry, it was time to add some transfers. I have this one from Cozy Christmas. I think I got this off of Amazon. I will leave the link below if I can find it. And then these are from IOD's Figgy Puding collection, which it was either last year or maybe the year before, I'm not sure. So I laid down my first transfer and I'm just putting my frame over it to see exactly where I want this to go. And then I will go ahead and tape it down into place so that I can, going to double check, and then I can lay down the next piece. This one needs to be trimmed out a little bit first. And I will put most of these in place and tape them down so that I can double check everything before I actually start applying them. My two little birds will go here on the bottom, but I'm not going to tape them down because I need to rub down the other transfers first. So now it's time to remove that backing and get these transfers on here. I'm just using the little transfer tool that comes with these and rubbing over until I start to get some release, and just making sure that all of it's transferred down before I completely pull it off, and then burnish it down with the carrier sheet that these are releasing from. I'm sure you've seen this 1,000 times, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I will speed through the process of me applying the rest of these transfers. Now I'm going to go ahead and tape down the birds and apply them. I'm going to use my Select Seal matte sealer to seal in all the techniques I did on this, as well as the transfers, before I move on to the next step. And that next step is taking my modeling paste and this Enchanted Shimmer, mixing the two together. I'm doing mostly modeling paste with just a little of the shimmer. I didn't want to get it too shiny, but as it turned out, you couldn't even see it, so I had to add some back later. Anyway, I'm going to mix this in there, and I'm going to be using this to create some 3D snow effects over the parts that already have the snow on the transfer, and then in areas that don't have the snow. And you can see here, like, I don't know if it shows on camera, but it does look kind of shimmery. But when it dried, it just didn't show up that much. So I did go in and add some more of that back over this once it was dried to bring out a little of that shine. I'm just using a palette knife to put a little bit of this. I'm trying to be light-handed with it and just add a little bit of that texture on top of the areas that already have snow on the transfer. When I was done with that roof line, I went ahead and added some of this to the little white snowy parts of the trees. And then I'm also going to use it to go around the bottom of the transfer, around the deer, around, like, in and around their feet, and just make it look like they're all kind of in the middle of a snowdrift. I also added this to the other transfers around the tops of the little plants and the tops of the birds and the little berries on the plants, and then I put it underneath the Merry Christmas part of the sign. With that done, it's time to attach the board to our little window frame. So I'm going to flip this over, make sure it does line up the way I want it to, and then I'm going to get out my Tite Bond wood glue. And I don't know why I put this so close to the inner edge. I was thinking, I knew that the backboard was a little shorter than the frame, but I was thinking in reverse. So I used my finger to kind of spread that out away from that edge. That was just, I don't know, I just wasn't thinking right. So anyway, I go ahead and add this glue all the way around this little window frame, spread it out, and then I will attach my board on there and get it all lined up the way I want to, and then I can add some staples to it to keep it secure. Now to finish off that back and make it nice and neat, not have those staples sitting out there to scratch up a wall, I am taking just some of that brown craft paper, tracing around the edge of this so that I can cut it out and then glue that onto the back of my board. I did a rough cut first, and then I used my paper cutter to get it nice and straight. I decided to go ahead and use my little craft iron to kind of smooth this paper out. It had some wrinkles in it. I just wanted to make it as smooth as I could. I'm using my Fabri-Tac glue to glue my craft paper down onto the back of my board. Now I need a hanging system, and I did not trust myself to reinstall the original hangers with this and get them perfectly level for this. So I'm just going to use this wire that I have. I am stapling it down onto my board, and then I will fold up the excess piece below the staple and twist it around the other part of the wire. And so then I measured onto the other side to make sure it was the same as the one I already did. And then, stapled that down. And then I can just twist up those ends of wire. And I think it will be okay that way. I might go in and cover that part, the staple and the wire part, with a little piece of the craft paper. Just, to protect the wall. It's a thin wire, but this is a lightweight piece, so I think it will work just fine. And so now that I have the hanging system on there, we can concentrate on the front of the frame. I'm using IOD's Blitz mold to make some snowflakes for the front of this. And I'm using the Amazing resin for the first time. Okay, I am used to the old type of resin that takes forever to set up. You have to stir it for like 3 minutes. So when this said to stir until it was clear, I had no idea that that would happen in like literally 2 seconds. So I stirred and stirred and stirred, thinking, no, it's got to take longer. I got one snowflake poured. I mixed up 40 milliliters because I wanted to do a bunch of snowflakes. By the time I got to the second one, it was already setting up. I was just, no. So I mixed up another batch and realized that you got to work much quicker, woman. You got to get this stuff out there. And so then those turned out. But that was a, kind of a pricey lesson for me. And here I did, some of the small ones and some of the medium size. I did not do the big one. I do not need one that big for this project. But these are all just gorgeous. I love all the detail. So the next step is to paint them. And I wanted to do a base of gray. So I'm going to water this down so that it will sink down into all those little details. I want this as the undercoat of the snowflake. After that, I went in with my white acrylic paint. I started out dry brushing, but I realized that I really didn't have to go that lightly. I could actually just add a light coat of paint. It did not sink down into that detailed area. So I was able to go a little bit more liberally with the white paint because I just wanted a hint of that gray showing from underneath. Once those were dry, I went in with my Enchanted Shimmer to bring some sparkly, shimmery shine to these. And it ended up being a little bit too much for this project. Most of it's pretty rustic. So I go ahead and apply these. I started off with the Tite Bond wood glue, but it took a really long time to set up. So I moved on to super glue for the rest of them. I wanted to do like a little collage with these overlapping so they didn't have a lot of area where they were actually attaching to anything, like just a couple of spots on the snowflake underneath it and then a couple of spots on the wood frame. So super glue ended up working much better for this, but once I got all of these on here, they were way too shiny for the rest of this. So I did go over them after the fact with another dry brush coat of the white acrylic paint to tone it down a little. The next step, I just wanted to add some twine to this around that top portion of the frame. So I attach it with some hot glue on the back and then I just start wrapping this around. I think I went around 3 times and then just attached it with some more hot glue on the other side. The last step for this is going to be to add a bow and some greenery in that upper left-hand corner. This is a bow that I had made last year for Christmas. It fit better with this project than any of the existing ribbon that I have to make a new bow. So I decided to just go ahead and use it. I need to trim it down a little. It's a little big. But then I'm just adding in a couple of pieces of this greenery that has a little bit of kind of a shiny snow look to it. And then a rusty star for the middle of the bow. So that we've got a little bit of shine. Oh, and here's where I'm going over the snowflakes with the white acrylic paint to tone them down. So I wanted a little bit of shine, but still to keep everything rustic. And here is where the snow that I did with the modeling paste, remember I told you that the sheen didn't show at all. So I went ahead and added in some more of that to bring that out a little bit. And then I trimmed the bow up. And that is going to do it for this one. So here is our completed vintage window frame with a nice finished back and a hanger. Thank you so much for watching. I am so happy to be back on here with you guys. I hope you find my content useful and will consider subscribing to my channel. But more importantly, I hope I've inspired you to go create something. See you next time.